well here. Cantona's getting involved with some supporters.
Cantona's violent attack on spectator Matthew Simmons,
not somebody, Oregon,
in January 1995 rocked the English Premier League and hit headlines around the globe. It remains one of the most shocking and iconic incidents in Premier League history. But for those who had been following him since his playing days in France, such hot-headed aggression won't have come as a big surprise. In fact, they would have recognised that the Kung Fu kick was a technique that he had long had in his martial arts repertoire, having honed and refined it playing for Auxerre. Cantona's fierce passion for football was sparked by his former goalkeeper father Albert, who introduced him to the ways of the ball, captivating young Eric, who competed nightly with his brothers, fashioning a makeshift ball out of old newspapers and having a kickabout in their bedroom. His love for the game intensified when his dad started taking him to watch his local team Marseille. As 6-year-old Eric was whipped up by the clamour of the cacophonous crowd and mesmerised by the silky skills of Swedish winger Magnusson and impressed by clinical striker Josip Skoblar. However, the moment that inspired him most back then was perhaps the opportunity to watch one of the all-time greats of the game, Johan Cruyff, as his AC Milan team dismantled l'OM at the Stade Velodrome. This, thought Eric, was how football should be played. Setting off on the path of pursuing his dream, a 9-year-old Cantona started playing for local club Esso Le Quelolet, although initially following in the footsteps of Albert and turning out between the sticks. If his youth club hadn't been so superior, then history might have followed a different script. You see, Quelolet were streets ahead of the opposition and would regularly hand out double-figure trouncings, meaning that young Eric, standing in goals, was rarely if ever called into action. He started to get impatient and implored the coaches to let him loose. He got his wish and was thrown into the attack for a youth tournament in Cannes. Cantona duly repaid the faith shown in him and was voted MVP for the tourney. He would play in over 200 matches for the side, and it quickly became apparent that his coaches nearly made as big an error as the fools who turned down the Beatles by having Cantona in goals. The boy was magisterial, with a delicious touch of pure velvet, incredible takers and a hunger for goals. Naturally, he was attracting the interest of other clubs and ended up joining Auxerre's youth academy. Taken under the wing of coach Guy Roux, the prodigious youngster continued to prove himself to be a precocious talent, stealing the show in the French Youth Cup and in the under-17 French national team. Cantona was forced to forge himself in the fiery and harsh environment of League 3, where bruising, tough and brutish defenders set out to try and bring him down to earth, as his stratospheric ego and self-belief were well developed even back then. You know, it is said that there's a fine line between genius and insanity, but Eric Cantona never cared to try and walk that line, giving in to the impulses and pulls of both of these forces. After failing to impress on his debut in 1993, Cantona was shunted back down to the reserves to work on his game. As was the law at the time, he was drafted for national service when he turned 18 in 1994, and no doubt Roux saw this as the perfect opportunity for the lad to earn some self-control, for discipline to be injected into his personality. Following his release from the forces, Cantona caused a stir in 1985 after a match against Cournon-le-Condre. The young starlet was singled out for special treatment and hacked to pieces by the opposition, something which he took in his stride for the majority of the game, until he retaliated against one particularly nasty challenge. He wasn't sent off, but he pissed off the opposing team, who waited outside his dressing room at the end of the game to jump him, give him a kicking. Cantona took on all of them himself as a brutal brawl erupted. Despite this, he became a key player for Roux and actually scored the goal which would see them qualify for Europe the following season, a typically venomous long-range strike against Strasbourg. This did not propel him to the next level as the coaches at Auxerre may have hoped, and he was loaned to Martigues in the 2nd division, where he found himself in a relegation dogfight, and his paltry 4 league goals were astonishingly enough to make him the top scorer and ensure Martigues remained in League 2. Naturally, his time there was not without incidents, as he was involved in a barney with a rowdy spectator for the first time. As we know all too well, it would not be the last. Nonetheless, his manager at Auxerre was pleased enough with his progression to view him as a capable replacement for departing first-choice forward Zarmach. Having been given the opportunity to prove himself worthy, Cantona did just that, with bells on, backing himself a splendid 17 goals, 13 in the league, to once again be instrumental in helping Auxerre qualify for Europe, placing 4th in the league. It was that year, 1987, that he would make his full international debut on August against West Germany. His obligatory piece of scandal and violence that year was a fight with his Auxerre and France teammate, goalkeeper Bruno Martini. Eric, punched Martini straight in the face. Cantona received a hefty fine, and Martini received a black eye for his troubles. The following season, Cantona wasn't quite as potent an attacking force for Auxerre, managing just 8 league goals. He continued to beguile and bewitch fans though, with his unique and distinctive dribbling style and exquisite technique. It's clear that Auxerre had a star player on their hands. It was also clear that he was a source of endless headaches. That season, his disciplinary record was marred with a 3-month suspension, reduced to 2 for a wild and dangerous kung fu style tackle of Michel Zakarian in a match versus Nantes. Kung fu kick. Cantona. Now, where have I heard that before? Nonetheless, his dazzling talent was outshining his impetuous, impulsive and aggressive nature, as a series of stunning performances for the France under-21 team at the Euros, including a double in the quarterfinals against USSR and a spellbinding man-of-the-match performance against England in the 2-legged semis, helped the national team to victory in the tournament. This, combined with his form for Auxerre, earned him the move of his dreams to the club he had adored since childhood. In Eric's own words, "When I was a little boy, what made me dream was the Stade Velodrome, and this love will never leave me." Marseille had to fork out for a French record fee of 22 million francs, around about £2 million, to secure his services. Cantona was joining an ambitious Marseille side, bankrolled by Bernard Tapie, who dreamt of winning a European trophy within 5 years. Cantona was part of that plan, and was brought in to partner our 24-year-old Jean-Pierre Papin, the legendary French goal machine and future Ballon d'Or winner who had just come off of his best season for l'OM. Cantona was a regular in the first half of his debut season, but he wasn't overly impressive, managing just 5 goals and 1 assist in 22 league appearances. Having gone several months without a serious violent meltdown, I'm sure you can agree one was well overdue, as l'enfant terrible had a reputation to uphold, a reputation of madness, and this time he really went berserk, playing for Marseille in a mid-season friendly, a zero-stakes, meaningless, should-be-no-edge charity match against Russians Torpedo Moscow. A frustrated Cantona booted the ball into the crowd. He was later taken off, as happens, in a friendly match, and was utterly raging about it. For reasons known only to him, he took his shirt off and threw it at the ref. Add this to the fact that just a few months previously, Cantona had come out and said this about French national team boss Henri Michel.
Je lisais un truc de Mickey Rourke, puisque c'est un gars que j'adore, qui disait que celui qui s'occupait des Oscars à Hollywood là, était un sac à merde. For
those not well versed in the langue de mort, he said that he was reading about how Mickey Rourke, someone who he really loves and respects, called those in Hollywood who hand out the Oscars shitbags, and that he thinks Henri Michel is not far away from that. This came at the end of a quite spectacular televised tirade where he called Michel one of the most incompetent managers in world football. After this, Eric Cantona was banned from the French national team indefinitely. This was obviously a huge deal at the time. Can you imagine? I mean, this is like if Phil Foden were to come out and call Gareth Southgate a fucking wanker for dropping him for a match against Malta or something. Such disgraceful behaviour outraged Tapie, with the incident against Torpedo being the final straw which saw the owner ban his young striker from the team, vow never to play him again, and loan him to Bordeaux for the final half of the season, where he would fare much better, bagging 6 in just 11 league matches. Marseille won the Ligue 1 title that season, and Cantona had featured enough for them to get a winner's medal, the first of his career. He still wasn't forgiven though, and Tapie loaned him out to Montpellier for the season. Cantona was again reasonably middle of the road in Ligue 1 in terms of numbers at least, scoring only 10 times. It was in the French Cup where he was to be most influential for his temporary club, scoring 4 goals, including a decisive one in the semis as Montpellier went on to win the competition. He almost never got to make this contribution though, as in October, just 13 matches into his time with the club, he got into a disagreement with teammate Jean-Claude Lemieux following a 1-0 loss to Lille, and dealt with it in the most typically Cantona way possible. He threw his boots in the face of the midfielder and threatened to beat him within an inch of his life. Many of his teammates wanted him to be given the sack and shipped back to Marseille, but Eric had luckily made a couple of allies in the form of 2 bona fide legends of the game, Carlos Valderrama and Laurent Blanc, who persuaded the higher-ups to keep him, and luckily their plays were successful as he got off with a 2-match suspension and a 10-day training ban. He was briefly allowed to play for Marseille again, where his game time was disrupted by constant manager changes, and he managed only 18 league appearances, although 8 goals in so few matches was actually a good return and helped Marseille to win the league. Eric did not get on with the latest manager however, so the ruthless Tappy sold him to Nîmes for 10 million francs. After 16 fairly forgettable performances, Cantona was to have what was almost his final blow-up in football. In a match against Saint-Etienne in December 1991, pissed off by a catalogue of perceived poor refereeing calls, Cantona exploded when a soft foul was given against him. He threw the ball at the referee and stormed off the pitch virtually before the ref could even send him off. At the subsequent FA hearing, Eric felt that they were putting his whole life and times unfairly under the microscope, rather than just that one incident, so he promptly called them all idiots, stormed out and announced his retirement from football. Luckily, his psychoanalyst and Gerard Houllier convinced him to start afresh in a new country. He listened and moved to Leeds, where he would begin his journey to become known as the King.